Say that with love.
Come with me. Come with us into the classroom of our future, where Black children read books, fall in love with characters and toys that substantiate their phenotypical beauty, and our diasporic history, where every bookshelf reflects their lineage. Questions are welcomed like kin, where genius is assumed, not earned, and learning feels like remembering, with joy a part of the curriculum.
Welcome to Say That with Love, a podcast where we reimagine Black childhood with legacy, liberation, and love. I'm your host, Dr. Leah Austin, the president and CEO of the National Black Child Development Institute, and also known as the president of the Black Children. Let it be known in this space, we love Black children unapologetically and out loud. Today, we are exploring what it means for Black children to have toys and books that reflect who they are and who they can become. Representation is not an accessory, it's a necessity. Every doll, every book, every image a child encounters tells them something about who they are and who the world believes they can be. Joining me is James Howard, Executive Director of the Black Inventors Hall of Fame and STEM Learning Center. He is a design historian, industrial designer, and educator who has developed more than 300 products and holds over 20 patents. Through his leadership, he works to preserve and amplify the legacy of Black inventors whose creativity has shaped our world. Together, we will explore the power of representation, innovation, and imagination, and what it means to create content and products where Black children see their brilliance reflected back at them. Welcome to the show, Mr. Howard.
Thank you, Leah. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. I want to kick us off by asking you about this word, representation. When you think about representation, what comes to mind for you? What does that mean?
First and foremost, it actually takes me back to my childhood. And that was, I was a child of the civil rights, just on the back end of civil rights. And as I went through my early childhood days, representation to me meant understanding the important role, first of all, of family, the role that my father played, the role that the neighbors played in helping to keep me in guardrails, because I was a very managed child, and then it also meant, and while in school, it meant making certain that the instructors and the teachers that I had were held accountable, and were looking out for my best interests. So representation meant, as a young Black kid growing up on the south side of Chicago, being under the influence of the community. So to me, the first thing I think about representation is the impact of the community and the influence that it had in my upbringing.
Absolutely. Can you share perhaps a moment or a story where representation, or even the absence of representation, shaped your own sense of possibility as a child or as a creator?
Well, I'm actually going to leap past the childhood and go into the young adulthood. As a graduate student in grad school, representation meant I was the only Black in that grad program. But the significance of that representation hit me hard when my graduate advisor looked at me during our review session after the very first semester and told me that I had no business being in the program, and that if it was left up to him, I would never have entered into the program. Now, I'm okay with everything he is saying up to that point, but these next words were epochal. He told me that next to the other graduate students who were all Anglo-Saxon, European, you name it, blue-eyed, blonde hair, all of these other graduate industrial designers, he tells me that next to them, compared to them, I rank a 0, right?
Oh my gosh.
So representation in that moment meant, how do you deal with this? How can you go back to your family? How can you go back to your community to get the type of support that you need to get past this type of, in many cases, career-ending, sessions that you have with an adult leader? So I did. I went back to my sister Doris, and she told me, "Babe, don't listen to that nonsense. Just push forward." I had the pleasure of meeting my childhood mentor, Charles Chuck Harrison, who invented the second generation Viewmaster. And Chuck told me, he says, "James, don't listen to that nonsense, right? There's a role for you in this industrial design community." And this was over 43 years ago when he told me this. And I have since gone on to lead a stellar career. And just last year, I received a Lifetime Achievement Award from that very organization that this graduate advisor was trying to shut me down to. So, representation to me represents the perseverance, but again, being able to go back and rely upon your community and your family and your mentors for the support to continue to represent.
Absolutely. It's so interesting because unfortunately we know how often these stories happen, right? So how many people have these stories? I actually, when you were talking, it takes me back to a similar situation I had in high school where a guidance counselor told me that I was not college material. And then you also, when you mentioned the Viewmaster, I just have to say this, it's a little off topic, but I think it still kind of relates, is that when I came to NBCDI to be the CEO, and we began our strategic planning process, we used the Viewmaster, the second generation Viewmaster, as we gave each of our strategic planning committee members the Viewmaster. It's literally on our strategic plan document. And the idea was that we wanted folks to be inventive and innovative in the process with us as they were thinking about Black children and the future of this organization. So we wanted to really pull in that spirit and then also hold this like classic toy of childhood so that they were also very much in like a playful space thinking about children. So when you said his name, that just made me totally smile because the Viewmaster was something that I absolutely know from childhood, and my son had one. But it was also more recently an important part of the strategic plan of NBCDI. So thank you for bringing his name into the conversation. That's really special.
My absolute pleasure. That particular toy is in the Toy Hall of Fame. And as I mentioned, Chuck was my college mentor. And I can honestly say that if I had not spent the time under his tutelage and his advice and counsel, I probably would have selected an alternative, right? So it's important that we get this mentor, within our underserved community. It's important that we have this foundation of support, these mentors, right? And all we have to do is look back to when many of us migrated from the South, particularly to Chicago and New York area and all of that. The family, as I mentioned earlier, the family extended beyond your immediate brothers and sisters and uncles and aunties. They were the neighbors, right? And they were, even at that time, they were allowed to somewhat correct you. If you got into trouble, you were doing something you had no business. Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Green, I tell you, I feared them just as much as my mom in that switch. So yeah, it's very important that we're able to sit back and rely upon these. And even more so, you mentioned the Viewmaster as a toy. It also was the precursor to present day virtual goggles. Right? Because it allowed a child to go and experience, right, in these 3D panoramas. It allowed the child with their own hands to manipulate and go into his own world, So it's very key for us to have these levels of influences. And that is exactly why I'm opening up the Black Inventors Hall of Fame Museum and STEM Learning Center so that kids, speaking of representation, they can come and see a face that looks like them, right? And be influenced to think about becoming engineers, designers, mathematicians, and physicists and so forth.
I really love what you said about the Viewmaster being the original, or in many ways, probably the muse for virtual reality and some of the VR glasses that we now know. And so I just think it's really interesting as we're having a conversation about representation. It speaks to the importance of the Black Inventors Hall of Fame, so that children can see themselves and also understand. I think sometimes for Black children, sort of the seeing themselves is often connected to like history, but being able to see themselves in something as classic as the Viewmaster, that inventor, and how that's still shaping their lives today. And so I wondered if you just pick up a little bit more on the reasoning behind the Black Inventors Hall of Fame and STEM Learning Center, and how you are really thinking about what it will do for children.
Without a doubt, the Black Inventors Hall of Fame Museum will allow audiences, the public audience, to come in and experience something they have yet to see in this nation. It will be the first museum dedicated exclusively to immortalizing the pioneering genius of African American inventors, right? So imagine, if you will, as a grandfather comes in and, is exploring, let's say, a Charles Frederick Page airship. This is Mr. Charles Frederick Page right here. That's his airship. This is a man who was born into slavery, raised 13 kids, was self-taught.
Oh, wow.
Taught himself to become a master carpenter, and had the audacity to dream to be the first to put man in flight. And he was sharing this dream at the exact same time the Wright brothers were sharing their dream for their plane. And little does history know, Charles Frederick Page received his patent on his airship 42 days before the Wright brothers received theirs.
Wow.
But the real tragedy in the story is that when Charles Frederick Page shipped his airship off to the Louisiana's World Fair in 1904, it never got there. It was stolen. It disappeared. Talk about a dream deferred. He was looking to win a $100,000 prize. I did the math. I went back and checked the numbers. Today, that is worth $3.5 million.
Oh my gosh.
And his airship was pirated, disappeared. 2 years later, he gets a knock on his door from a white agent offering to pay him $30,000 for the rights to his patent, recently acquired. And he had so much pride, he turned down that offer and never looked back to inventing again. So the moral of that story is that we can go and we can resurrect this story, right? And we can put him out there for the world to see and ponder the what ifs. What if Charles Frederick Page airship had reached Louisiana's welfare? What if he had won, right? What if? How many kids may have been inspired, underserved youth, boys and girls, may have been inspired to become pilots, right?
Absolutely.
And so forth, to become aeronautical engineers. It is so important that we tell these stories so that these kids from today's generation, as well as their grandfathers and parents, can be rewarded with what these stories have to offer. So I get back to the grandparent example. Imagine, if you will, a grandparent coming in with his kid, and they're looking at our huge exhibit because we're building a life-size replica of the Charles Frederick Page airship. This thing is huge.
Oh my God.
30 feet
Wow.
tall, right? With the balloon and 90 feet this way, 30 feet that way.
Wow.
We're rebuilding the entire airship and then allowing an interactive, immersive experience. So you can imagine flying the airship. You'll be able to go into a small little theater and see Charles Frederick Page's story that's going to be reenacted, by the way, It's going to be reenacted so that you can learn the pain and the angst that he experienced, right? When he first learned that his airship had disappeared. I'm working with his family right now, his grandson and his great grandson, and was recently awarded a $500,000 grant from IMLS, that's the Institute of Museum and Library Services, to build the airship. And that's going to be our anchor. That's going to be our flagship exhibit, right?
Okay.
And the museum itself is going to be 100,000 square feet, divided into four primary galleries and halls. The Hall of Medicine and Health Science, the Hall of Transportation and Aeronautical Engineering, the Hall of Agricultural and Domestic Products, and then lastly, the Hall of Technology and Telecommunications. It's just going to be a remarkable opportunity, and my board and I we're dedicated, absolutely determined to have our christening and our door opening in late 27, early 28.
As I listen to Mr. Howard, I am reminded that representation is the architecture of imagination. Before children can build the world, they must see themselves in it. When Black children see their skin tones, hair textures, and their histories reflected in toys and stories, they are not just playing, they are practicing possibility. They are learning that their creativity has value, their curiosity is a gift, and their dreams belong in every room of the future. Representation does not limit the imagination, it liberates it.
Amen.
Mr. Howard, I'm thinking and reflecting on the story that you just shared about Mr. Frederick, and wondering, as we think about inventors today, Black inventors in particular, who are trying to get their products out, they're trying to break out into whatever field they may be interested in. And what are some of the challenges or systemic barriers that you see that are still present, that are holding back many of the Black inventors who are trying but just can't get out there?
Well, the main one that has always impeded a lot of our progress, particularly along the more intellectual side of intellectual property and invention, is in fact this perceived notion, right, that the African American specimen is intellectually inferior to that of their white counterparts, right? The first inventor, one of our first heralded inventors in this country, was Benjamin Banneker, right? And he wrote a 13-page letter to Thomas Jefferson, totally dismissing with this notion, right? Asking Thomas Jefferson to go on public record to dismiss with this notion. And Jefferson never did. But there was a white surveyor who had a chance to work with Benjamin Banneker, and his name was Andrew Ellicott. He was the nation's town surveyor for DC. And he went on record as saying that this whole idea of intellectual inferiority is totally baseless, right? So it's important to know that we have to break past that particular perception. And then we're dealing with marginalization, particularly today, right? Basically, when my graduate advisor told me I ranked a 0 compared to the other graduate students, he didn't give me a chance of marginalization, like 0. Where are you? You're not even in the bracket. So we're dealing with marginalization. And today, from a statistical point of view, young engineers and young Black college graduates who aspire to pursue STEM-related careers, that aspiration is on par with that of their white counterparts. It truly is on par in terms of the proportions in this country, right? But at the end of that journey, we are 1/4, right, in terms of representation within the STEM. 1/4 that of whites. So in other words, today, we don't have as many engineers as we ought to. We don't have as many doctors as we ought to. We don't have as many mathematicians as we are to. Not to say without fail, we don't give it a shot. But along that development cycle, particularly in the area of invention, as well as even pursuing advanced degrees, these impediments of marginalization, these impediments of a lack of franchise, right? These impediments of a lack of legacy wealth, all of these become barriers that we just have to absolutely push through. But as my good friend Lonnie Johnson, the inventor of the Super Soaker, speaking of inventions,
Absolutely.
Again, if we just go back to what avails us within our own families and our own communities, Lonnie advises parents, some of the best advice I've ever heard anyone give to parents. He says to see in your child what they can be, and what you see, they will become, right? And he says this because he lived it. He exemplifies that very narrative. When Lonnie Johnson was just 11 years old, he was so enamored with rockets that he attempted to make rocket fuel on his mom's kitchen stove, but it didn't go so well, right? He nearly burnt the house down. So,
oh my God, I have an 11-year-old, so this story is making me nervous.
Listen to this. With embers flying, and fire here, he quickly went to quell the fire, and then he rushed to his bedroom and put on a second pair of pants. Why did he put on a second pair of pants? Because he knew that when his father came home from work, he was going to tear a hole in his rear end. But he goes on to say, surprisingly, when his father got home, he was calm. He asked to see young Lonnie out on the back porch. He sat him down. He put his arm around him. And he advised him. He says, son, you know what you did there was wrong and dangerous. He says, in the future, if you just got to do this, do it outside in the yard. And then he bought him a portable stove. He bought him a portable stove. That was an example of Lonnie's father seeing what he could be. And sure enough, Lonnie became one of the country's most prominent aeronautical engineers, working for the Jet Propulsion Laboratories for NASA, working on the spaceship Galileo, and all kinds of remarkable things. So, yeah, that's so important, that parents, regardless of their own stature, regardless of how much of an educational background they have, regardless of how much money they have in their bank account, your kids, right? They are literally your best equity. Invest in them, support them. And if they're exhibiting this little managed behavior, don't be too quick to squash it.
Absolutely. I just, this story, you see it, the big smile. This story brings me so much joy. And as I mentioned, as the mom of a current, he's 11 years old, I feel that story really deeply, and just love this idea that Mr. Johnson's parents, and his father in particular in the story would, that response of this was dangerous if you're going to do it, like really sort of like just kind of problem solving and laying out, like, I see the curiosity. I see that what you did was not about being bad, which was what happens a lot of times to our children, is they're curious. And so they try something, they experiment, and they're seen as being bad. But that story really exudes an ability for that parent to say, I'm going to tap into your curiosity. Now I'm going to guide you because you almost burnt the house down.
You got it.
And that's dangerous. But how do we tap into it and not destroy it, which is what happens a lot of times to our children.
Yeah, it truly does. We as a community, we have to be there to support one another.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I want to ask you this because I feel like there have been some themes throughout the conversation so far, right? And it's about, yes, books and toys, and even nowadays media. And I still want to hold the importance of those, what you might kind of call external forces. Still want to hold the importance of those because they're such a large part of all of our lives, but in particular our children's lives.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to come back to that because I want to pick up on your theme of the people closest to you also have such a great influence on what a child understands about their place in this world currently, like who they are and their place in this world in terms of what they can be. And you just, through the story with Mr. Johnson, gave beautiful advice about a parent's role, right? I wonder if there's a similar story or even advice that you might give like an elementary school educator. I taught kindergarten, first and third grade, so I'm often thinking about what those leaders need, especially when we're in a time and we kind of foresee that we might be in this time for, it feels lengthy, that educators may be feeling the pressure of, well, how do I ensure that all my students are represented in the classroom when they're getting all sorts of messages that they can't do that? What advice might you give an educator?
Well, it's so funny that you would ask this because just over the past few years, I have actually been traveling the country and the world sharing advice to educators, all right, on how to encourage creativity amongst their charge, amongst their kids, right? Just 2 years ago, I was invited to lecture at Oxford University to a bunch of educators, fifth grade educators, right? On how do I nurture creative behavior, right? Creative activity, creative discipline to kids, and how am I careful not to squash it, right? So naturally, I share the stories like of Lonnie Johnson's story, and even David Vonner, who is a world-renowned toy designer, formerly with Hasbro and Mattel. His story is very similar to Lonnie's in that he was so enamored with spray paint that he went and actually took it and started spraying it on his mom's living room walls, right? And then when he learned that it doesn't come off, he had the audacity to take a large plant that she kept in the corner of the living room and move it to the wall to cover it up, right? And when she came home, she had the exact same reaction that Lonnie Johnson's father had. He get upset. She set him on the couch. She put her arm around him, admonished him, and then went out and bought him the largest possible drawing pad that he had ever seen in his life. And he went on to become, again, one of Hasbro's most accomplished toy designers, let alone black, white, or indifferent. So I think it's important that the teachers just are taught certain skill sets about how to understand the value in their charge. These kids, literally, right? I call it kids having equitable kids. I call it the Kabesu, kids becoming equitable sponsored users, right? They're our future, right? And they have equity. They have intelligence. You hand them a cell phone and they will help you resolve any technological issue that you have with your phone to this day, right? So how do we tap into that? And the first seed, the first responsibility is realizing that there's equity, there's value in this child, regardless of whether he comes buttoned down with a little bow tie or whether he comes with nappy hair. It doesn't matter. There's value in this child, and there are ways in which you can take that and nurture it. And one of the first things I teach in my workshop is within the classroom, try to avoid using the word no. Seek alternative ways, right? Because once you say no, you put up a wall, right? Doesn't mean that you have to be passive and give way to a child, but there are alternative ways to bring to a child's understanding that perhaps that is not the best tack to take, or those are not the best words to use, or this is not this and that's that. So we seek creative ways to say no. All right. It's just one within my creative workshop of how to keep a kid encouraged, because the word no can shut many, many kids down, particularly when they're trying to show you some of their skill sets, right? I tell educators in my workshop about a story about a kid who, when he was in second or third grade, he drew a little hobby horse. And he had shown it to his friends in school, and they all laughed at it. And he never, ever, ever picked up a pen and drew again from that one experience, right? So you got to be careful and think of more creative ways to deliver your message, so to speak, right? And to instill the confidence in these kids. And these are just a few examples, staying away from the word no, and then as well as encouraging kids that they can seek, rather than limiting them, encourage them that they can seek high goals. They don't have to wait for permission to be told you can become an engineer or you can become a doctor. So my biggest advice to educators is to know that you have the power and the influence and the confluence to really, set a trajectory for these kids that can really be the sky's the limit. But you have to believe in that and then develop a course of action and a game plan that delivers.
Absolutely. I love how you talk about children, and you've used equity, I think maybe 2 or 3 times. And I love this belief in just how important they are. I want to kind of go down the line because we've talked about parents, we've talked about educators. So I'm an inventor or an author, a toy maker, and I'm feeling like there are just too many barriers. Maybe catering to Black children isn't going to make me any money. So I'm not really sure that's the path I want to take in terms of the product or the content that I'm making. What would you say to someone who maybe is sitting on the fence in that way?
I would say don't listen to it. Adopt a posture of perpetual optimism, because every child has a propensity to do great things. And that is not hyperbole. They all have the propensity to do great things. And if you, as an inventor, want to develop a toy or write a book, to help all children, and particularly in the underserved community, then you need to accept that pretty much as a charge, as your mission. Embrace it, right? Embrace it with all sorts of optimism, and then perpetually just move forward. Don't be impeded by a lack of funds. Don't be impeded by a lack of franchise. You gotta, you can become your own worst enemy. You have to embrace this, what I call perpetual optimism. And all that essentially is this: changing your perspective on why you're doing what you're doing, right? So you derive your optimism from serving others. You derive your optimism from understanding that you have a higher purpose to do good for the community. So when you shift your perspective on why you're doing what you're doing, right, and you're deriving your optimism from serving others, then it's very easy to practice perpetual optimism, because there's always someone out there in need of your services, your product, your advice, your expertise.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this journey of really thinking together and figuring out the ways in which we continue to invent and create toys and books and media and other products that we may not even know anything about yet, right? That's the beauty of invention, is there's just so much out there that really smart, wonderful people are thinking about. And our desire here is to really ensure that folks are thinking about how these products, this content impacts Black children and really, again, represents for them who they are and who they can be.
Indeed, indeed.
Thank you. Any last words you want to give?
Actually, it is, but I would like it to be accompanied by another product, which I would have to just reach it for my table. If I can go off screen for 1 second.
Absolutely.
I'll be
Absolutely.
right back. My last word of advice is simply for parents and the audience out there is always seek good. And again, be very, very careful, right? That if given an opportunity, not to squash a child's dream, but to encourage it. And if you do that, you'll get David Bonner designing Iron Man figures, right? You'll get Lonnie Johnson designing Super Soakers and Nerf guns, right? You'll even get old school Charles Harrison designing Viewmasters.
Absolutely.
The wonderment of toys and books, they pretty much go hand in hand, and they can influence a child mightyfully from their youth all the way to the fulfillment of being a productive citizen in today's society.
Oh, absolutely. The wonderment is not a luxury, it's a necessity. I have to tell you, it's so funny because this was completely not planned, but all three of those toys, literally my son has upstairs in his room. The only difference is that his Viewmaster is red, but he literally has all three of those upstairs in his room right now. I am completely taking with me, and hope the audience takes with them, the idea, the belief, the reality that wonderment is not a luxury, it is a necessity. That representation affirms identity and fuels imagination. When Black children see themselves reflected in books, toys, and stories, they learn that their lives and their ideas matter. So here's the invitation. If you are an educator, examine the materials and the experiences in your classroom. Do they honor the diversity and the brilliance of your students? Do they continue their curiosity? If you are a parent or a caregiver, curate play spaces and bookshelves that tell our children the truth, that they are creative, capable, and worthy of wonder. If you are an inventor, think about your products. How do or can they show Black children all that they are and can be? Visit nbcdi.org to explore resources that help families and educators build affirming learning environments for Black children. Representation is love in action, and our children deserve to see themselves in every story we tell. Thank you to our wonderful guest, James Howard, for his visionary leadership and commitment to celebrating Black innovation and imagination. Say That with Love is a podcast from the National Black Child Development Institute. This episode was created with our ABF creative production team and our partners, and with love for the communities that inspire this work. And to Black children everywhere, we love you unapologetically and out loud. I'm Dr. Leah Austin. Thank you for listening.